Hello.
Hi.
And welcome to another edition of Story World Explorers, where we're exploring the story world of the Knights of Mydista.
So the Knights of Mydista is a part of a larger story world, the Time Realm, created by Maxwell Allen Duncan, a good friend of ours and of the podcast. And we had a great conversation about Knights of Mydista, very specifically this trading card game in which you enter the Time Realm.
Right. The Time Realm is a much broader story world, but we're focusing on just one little corner of it. And the really cool part about this story world is that the audience actually gets a lot of say in how the story gets told.
That's right. So through different tournaments and different other ways of interactions, the Knights of Mydista trading card game, the people that play the game end up determining what happens in the entire conflict. So it's a great conversation. There's a lot of really cool the factions and the characters that you get to play. And once again, the tournaments sound like they're going to be a lot of fun to both watch, read, and be and participate in.
And actually go to the tournament yourself, like you're at a ball game and you're cheering on your favorite team.
So grab yourself some popcorn, take a listen, and enjoy. All right, great. Well, we are on with a very good friend of ours, Maxwell Allen Duncan, former Transmedia. He's a current Transmedia producer. God damn it, current Transmedia producer, friend of the podcast, friend of the Conrath brothers. We got to meet you through Houston Howard, which was always a lot of fun. Houston always sends us really good guys that know what Transmedia is, what Transmedia is about. Today we were talking about your story world, the Time Realm, most specifically about the first entrance into the Time Realm, Knights of Mydista trading card game. It's very exciting. This is something that Jack and I have been working on independently with Max as well, so we have a little bit deeper insight than we usually do. But Max, tell us about the Time Realm, and then let's dive into this very exciting trading card game.
Cool, yeah. So the Time Realm is something that I've been working on for now almost 20 years. It's kind of like everything that every story I've ever wanted to tell, but hadn't had the ability to do it. And it's kind of a culmination of coming to understand Transmedia and coming to understand franchises interconnectivity and realizing that all of these stories that I want to tell, even though they're different, they could all exist in the same world, or the same worlds, which is what we'll get into. But really, essentially, the Time Realm is about an alternate Earth and two other planets that kind of exist within the same space, but on different planes. And those planes start to merge together into one physical form. There's a lot. And so in order to introduce it, we're going to scale it down a little bit and talk about just one corner of it. Starting actually with the tabletop role-playing game. So I've narrowed it down to 9 different settings that I want to create over the next 10, 20, 50 years. And they're all these 3 worlds in different eras. And so you'll be able to play across space and time once you have the whole set. So the first one that we're working on right now is also where the trading card game, the story of the trading card game takes place. It's in a country called Mydista on the planet of Daer Lurra. And the main conflict of the card game is that in the land of Mydista, the ruler dies, and there's this kind of power struggle between 6 different factions. They all kind of have a seat in the ruler's cabinet, and now with this vacuum, they're trying to fill in the space. And so these 6 different people groups, these 6 different people groups are fighting for power. My goal is not only for people to watch and enjoy and read, the stuff that's coming out, but also to interact with it. And so I think one of the coolest things is this trading card game is not just because how do you tell a story with a trading card game, right?
Right.
The goal is to host tournaments for this trading card game, and the results of the tournaments dictate kind of the history of the world and how this conflict plays out. And so the players will also, in a way, be playing a part in the creation of the story.
Yeah.
And that's where we're starting.
Yeah. So that was a ton of information. So let's kind of break this down a little bit.
Yeah.
From the beginning. So with the time realm, right, we have these 3 planets that are coming together, right? They're existing on different planes. And little spoiler alert, Jack and I had already sat down with Max and we had gone through the time realm around this time last year. And it got so big and so crazy and so confusing because there's so many different corners of a story world that really we need to be planning on, expansion, right? Like you said, 20 to 50 years down the road, if everything goes right, this is the only thing that you ever work on, right? And there's enough creative ingenuity within that story world because you could tell different types of stories, like that we know of on this alternate Earth that there are, things that are happening that don't happen on this Earth that allow for different types of stories to be told. With real life events morphing around that, such as World War I, World War II, and such. Not to spoil too much for you, but the within these, so it got so big, right? And so let's talk a little bit about the trading card, or not the trading card, the tabletop RPG, because as everybody who listens to this podcast knows, we are big fans of tabletop RPGs. We don't play tabletop RPGs, but we enjoy reading the rule books of tabletop RPGs because of how much backstory you have to give. So each one of these planets, you have 3 planets, each one of these planets has 3 eras in them, and that's how you came up with the number 9, right? 3 times 3 is 9 for our elementary school listeners that aren't in 3rd grade yet. So we have 9 rule books that are eventually going to be written, right? And it's an important note that these, with any sort of tabletop RPG, how in depth you have to be with those rule sets so that people can then make their own stories within those, once again, these 9 different eras on these 3 different planets, which is a lot of fun. It's a really, really great idea. It's a great way for you to pace out your own story world. And we're literally talking, if you were to think about like a 3 by 3 like box, right? With 9 squares in it. We're talking about the furthest left or furthest right bottom square is where the Knights of Mydista takes place. So it takes place very much on the very beginning of Daer Lurra, the planet of Daer Lurra. So let's talk a little bit about like setting the scene for the Knights of Mydista for this trading card game. What is happening on Daer Lurra just before the clash between these 6 factions starts to happen?
Excellent. So in the creation of this planet, these 6 celestial star-like beings come down and they start to mold the planet and create life. The 6 beings put together kind of a list of what humans should be. They develop what is essentially the magic system of Daer Lurra, is the human aspects. So the body, the mind, the heart, the soul, and the spirit. And they all have different, like, they're all obviously different. But my goal, kind of, when we think of like personal health, a lot of times it's usually just physical. But there are so many different things about being a human that helps us, stay alive. More than just our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, our ability to interact with other people, our social lives, and then our relationship to ourselves and like how we view ourselves. And so the magic system in that is kind of about keeping up those things and being healthy in all of these aspects. And to a point where if you are super healthy in these aspects, you have some extra boons, some things that as a normal human you wouldn't be able to do. Another sense, you obviously physical strength, for physical is the most easily understood one. Um, and so these celestial beings, they create these different groups, these people groups. Um, there's also, outside of this group, an entity that is about destruction. It's about, nothingness, about like non-existence, and it wants to change things and alter them and create isolation where if a human being is isolated, it's hard to keep up with this, the social health stuff, things like it's targeting specifically all of those different aspects of humanity and causing suffering. And so um, we call them the Outworlders. They're these like alien, monstrous beings that even just being around them, like your if we're looking at like Betrayal at the House on Haunted Hill, it's a game. It has a sanity score, and that's one of your stat points. Um, being around these things causes you to freak out and lose your mind and all of these other things. It doesn't affect you just physically,
right?
And so right before we get into this like power vacuum part of the story, all of these factions are united. They're one country. Mydista is a united front against these outworlders, these monsters. And uh, they've essentially come to a point where they've beaten them, they've pushed them back. They're on the outskirts of everything, and everything's kind of nice and fine. Right. And so, whereas they were once a united front, uh, this leader that I mentioned, um, this leader is some guy that comes from Earth, a totally different planet. He just ends up on finding his way to Mydista, and he can't get back, and so he's a World War I soldier, and he takes his knowledge of explosives, of tactics, anything he can, and helps them to fight off these outworlders. And then they raise him up as their leader. They're like, this guy's great. He's from beyond our world. He's helped us. He's saved us. He's our messianic kind of character. But of course, he's human and he dies.
Right.
And so now that they've raised up this one person to be their leader, right. Whereas before they were kind of a group led. Now this power vacuum happens, and the leaders of each of these factions think they should be the one to take up the mantle. And so that's what kind of leads to this conflict that we see play out in the card game.
So before this World War I soldier came, it was more of a government by committee. Mydista right. was. And then after they raised this one man up as king, they're like, we can never go back to the way it was.
Right.
Well, I think that it was really what ends up happening, right? We've seen this play out in history a gajillion different times. And, Max, when we were talking about this initially, like the start of Knights of Mydista, this internal conflict, the civil war between these six factions, which once again, these six factions represent six of the ideal qualities that you would find in a human being, right? So there is one that's the Tutio that's very much about strength, and then there's Kari that's very much about passion and friendship and alliance. And so you have these factions that are fighting each other. I think it's the same thing that happened after Caesar became dictator for life.
No, I was just saying that's what happened. Like
right.
It was So right. That's what happened. And then, as you were saying, it's almost like, because they're all parts of the same, of what makes a human being great, mm-hmm. It's almost like they need all those aspects, because, like you said, the intellectual might be a little bit too cold and calculating, whereas the person who loves friends is too forgiving and doesn't understand. It's like, oh, well, they made bad choices, so so that doesn't make any sense to give. It's like if if the whole hen that baked the bread was like, well, you didn't help me at any other point, so why am I going to give you the bread after I did all the work?
Right.
So it's interesting how they had this perfect system, and then of course humanity had to fuck it up.
It was like it's like they had a perfect balance too, right? It was like instead of before this World War One, which I love this story about the World War One guy coming, but we're not going to spoil anything. It's one of my favorite things about Knights of Mydista, that you don't like. You will know that this guy, a leader, has died, and that's what's causing the conflict, right? Is now who takes over, right? As Alexander the Great said on his deathbed, when asked who will rule your empire, he said, whichever one of you is the strongest, which caused no conclusions to come. And the Seleucids and the Ptolemaic Egyptian, it all fractured into a million different pieces, and everybody, all a bunch of infighting. And so what I really love about it is that, like, the World War II guy is just he's a lot of fun to be like, so the reason why the linchpin as to why the conflict started.
So I'm interested is which one took the first blow? Which one started the war? Was it just he died and then they're all like, I actually don't like you? Or was there one person that was like, I should lead? And then do we know what was the sequencing of events that led to the Civil War after his death? Or was there parts of it, were there infighting already happening leading up to the man's death?
Ooh, like jockeying for power and stuff.
Right, especially after he's on his deathbed. And how long do the people on Mydista tend to live, and how old was the man, and do we name the man? Does the man have a name?
Have you written all these questions down so you can address them accordingly in the order that Jack asked?
I will listen to the podcast numerous times. No, so what I like about this is leading up to the release of the card game, what I want to do, I'm taking a page, I'm not shy about it, I'm taking a page out of Overwatch's book. What I really liked about Overwatch's website was that they had all of the characters that you could play as. They had their own little stories, their little short animated short films, their little short comics, whatever. I really like that idea. And so I'm going to steal it. And so before the release of the card game, we're working on the website right now, and I'm developing little short stories for each of the main adventures that you're able to play in the card game. And some of them will be talking about, from their perspective, something that happened before the whole conflict started. Some will be after, but we're going to explore that in individual stories about kind of the events that led up to the falling out, and a little bit more exploring about the mysterious, soldier personally that leads up to this stuff. So while I don't have any concrete answers for you yet, that is being explored in those character short stories.
Yeah. And that's what's been a lot of fun too. And that's a conclusion that through some conversations was the best way to kind of go about it, because, we're going to get into the card game, how it's played and such. And, if for those of you that are watching on YouTube, we'll even kind of show a little bit of like what the setup looks like and stuff like that. It's very well thought out. Mac has done a great job. Card layout wise, even just specifically about how, you take attack points and this and that. So the, man, I keep losing my train of thought. I just look at the ground and I lose my train of thought.
We're talking about the short stories.
The short stories, right. The best way to do that, because there are so many interesting, there are a couple of treasure cards are a thing, right? And there was, while we were working on the Great Sword of Vali, not Valdi, as I like to say, I like to change names of things. I was just writing those little fun descriptions that you see on the bottom of a lot of trading cards. Yeah. Right, that just gives you a little context to what it is, right? It doesn't mean anything for the card game itself, except if you're really interested as to what this sword is. And I had it that, there was the original Great Sword, and it's been lost to time, and it was quenched in Guardian blood, and it was forged from and this and that kind of stuff. And actually making, and as we know from our conversation with Nick Jones, folkloric just insights. And really, you don't need to think too hard about where the great sword came from. I don't, back when you had developed the great sword, it probably wasn't anything but just this gigantic, an actual great sword, two hands. But what
Yeah,
it
it's
shows
just
is
like a reference to my D&D campaign that I played a couple of
right,
years ago.
but it
You know?
could be bigger, right? And it could
Yeah.
show those, and even on the card game itself, with some of the things we have quirky conversations between two characters. This to show a little personality with the characters, right? And I love this idea of the short stories beforehand because then it's almost like a treasure puzzle piece type thing, right? It's like, wait a minute. Well, Celine said this about the World War One guy, but is that actually how he got, And then there will be eventually a transmedia component that will tell the story of the World War One soldier because it's a very interesting story, and his own motivations as to how he became the right now it's just that he knew how to make grenades, but
Yeah.
eventually his own personality, his own desires could come out a little bit like in Man in the High Castle with John Smith.
Oh,
right, where it's like if you put somebody in a situation. Have you seen Man in the High Castle?
I've not.
Okay. Well, it's a dual like
I read
yeah.
for one of the parts
Okay.
actually.
Oh, did
Yeah, but I've read one episode.
okay. So yeah, so essentially this character John Smith,
well, it's basically two
right.
parallel universes.
Right.
One
of
where the
which
Nazis win the war,
right.
and one where our timeline and how they're bleeding over.
Right.
How essentially the Nazis have figured out or trying to figure out how to go into parallel universes
and conquer all that
universes.
And so John Smith in the one universe where the Nazis won, he defected to the Nazis because he really enjoyed the military operations, and he ultimately becomes the Reich master of the United States, right? Like he loved it so much. But then in the other side, in our world, he was like, oh well, good thing the war ended because I don't know if I could have stopped, right? And now he's like a traveling salesman. And so what's interesting about that is with the World War, with our character in Knights of Mydista, and how he causes all this, like maybe if he had never come over, that never would have happened. He would have gone home, he would have raised a family.
Or maybe the Outworlders would have taken over.
Right, and that too. And so that's a lot of fun as well, right? And seeing these characters evolve through this conflict. Let's talk about the factions. We haven't talked about the factions yet. We have 6 factions. You'll see them on the screen. These are all cool looking, fun logos and such, and with the little descriptors. And I'll let you just run through all 6 of them because I think that knowing the factions, and then we can get into the characters that are in those factions and what they tend to be better at and how that influences the card game.
Excellent. So we have the Kari people. Their symbol is a heart or a rose. Sorry, we didn't change that. The symbol is a rose. Their color is red. They are the ones who dealing with passion. Passion is their human aspect that they cling to. They favor romance and friendship above all things. This particular conflict is very difficult for them because they are such social creatures. They have friends across the lines, especially, all the soldiers across all the factions, bond together in this war against the Outworlders. And now there's infighting between factions. And so they're facing their friends at the request of their families, and it's hard.
Right.
And we have Tutio, as you mentioned before. They favor physical prowess and endurance. They're all about maintaining their physical body and developing it to its maximum potential. And they're the inventors of competition, which is really fun to play out. We have Elika. They favor music and community with the natural world. They're very, very spiritual, kind of, hippie people.
Well, trade too.
Huh?
Trade, right? They're the
and trade, yes.
Right.
Trade is big with them. And we have Gammon. They are all about meditation, self-reflection, um, very, very interpersonal, which then kind of causes them to be a little narcissistic. And that one is very close to my heart because when I took the quiz that I created, that's the one that I ended up getting. So uh, that was kind of funny. Satir, we have people who favor intelligence and mental fortitude above all things. Um, they they're kind of the Zen mental, you know, um, philosophers and scholars of the group. And then we have Vigo, and these people favor repentance and forgiveness. This is they are kind of the people who are the most willing to serve others. Um, and because I mentioned that there are 5 human aspects, but there were 6 creators. The 6th creator, Vigo, was supposed to give them a 6th aspect. It would have been providence. It would have been like protection, essentially. And he failed to do that, which is why people are immortal. Um, and so his failure to do that has caused his people to desire, forgiveness for that. They're seen as a reflection of his failures, and so a lot of what they do is just to help others is their main goal. Because that's what they can add to the conversation.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so those are the 6 different groups that are present, and each of the groups they all have different character classes. Obviously, of course, this is based heavily on D&D. I've been playing D&D since I was 15. And so I love all of that stuff. And I created these character classes. There are 6 of them. And so they bear similarities to traditional D&D classes. But I kind of consolidated a little bit so that there's, more concrete options. We have the Chosen, who are the spiritual leaders, your paladins, your clerics and paladins. They're kind of the ones that are we'll say at most fault for the infighting because they're kind of the ones bickering between themselves about who should lead. When the Power Guardians, the celestial beings, were in Mydista, these were the chosen people to speak to them, and they have the closest connection to the Power Guardians. Nowadays, they're the clan leaders, and they're, the reason why everybody's fighting. Savants, they're monastic magic wielders. While most of them are content to hide in their temples, they're dedicated to self-improvement on all aspects. Sometimes they can be found wandering and traveling to correct injustices, which is kind of cool. They're your monks, also kind of clerical. The Vanguard are their hunters, archers, couriers. Some people are hired to be personal protectors. They're kind of your slick and sly, sneaky guys. The Wayfarers are musicians, traveling merchants, and guides. The world outside of Mydista is kind of dangerous, and traveling to and from is risky. And so these are your guides. These are your yeomen. These are the ones that will travel with you, the good traveling buddies. Yeah. And they'll play you a song. Soldiers, obviously your fighters, barbarians. These guys are the front lines against the forces of evil. And then we have the Outworlders themselves. So I talked about Outworlders as these like monstrous aliens, but also the name applies for any humans that are affected by alter magic. So you have your witches, your warlocks, these kinds of people that like tap into this alien magic that that kind of are transformed by it.
Yeah.
And they are also called Outworlders. And for a lot of time, these particular people were shunned by Mydista. They're like, nope, you're just as alien as the things that infected you. We don't want you around. You're going to infect us. You're evil. But now that this conflict has become about, control, some people have decided that these half human, half alien kind of things could be really good as weapons. These witches, we could really use them. I mean, hey, you're from my family. You're you know what? You're family. And
Right. Yeah.
you can
No,
cause a
it's
lot.
it reminds me a lot of recruitment of just like physical specimens in sports. It's just like, oh no, we got to go with that. I mean, look at him; he's 7 feet tall. Like it doesn't even matter if he's never dribbled a basketball before.
Yeah,
we have to have this guy on, right? And so then it's a strategic type of thing, or even in the fall of the Western Roman Empire, of most of the ranks were filled with paid mercenary groups. It's like, you guys aren't Romans, but it's better than not having you, right? And so it's like that. It's interesting. Even that dynamic is kind of interesting about how this whole war was fought against the Outworlders to keep them away, right? The true pure-blooded, if you want to go that route, Outworlders, right? And then now you have these guys that, like you said, that they I won't get corrupted by the power of what it is, right? Which, for whatever they do, they don't, it doesn't really matter, but that these chosen, right, which you've alluded to, are the ones that are kind of causing this bickering back and forth of like, no, we should be in charge, or, personal goals, which once again, these are all just great stories as to like why, certain factions hate each other, or, or don't like each other, or maybe they never really liked each other, or maybe they forgot that they liked each other.
Yeah, I think because a lot of times the self itself is in conflict with other things. So the passion is always going to be in conflict with the intellectual side of things. The friendship aspect is always going to be a little bit more is always going to be in conflict with the fact that you don't know if this person is taking advantage of you.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of times where it's like, don't act don't act when you're angry. Don't go to the store when you're hungry, because you're going to get a bunch of stuff you don't want.
Right.
You can't always trust yourself.
Yeah. And I like this. I like this idea. Like this idea, and that's why like all of this, even between other people, can feel like inner turmoil, because it's like, I understand this, but I also feel this, and it's kind of hard to reconcile those things, even just inside oneself as a human being.
Right. Right.
And so being able to personify those things into people groups and have that conflict there, I think is very interesting.
Yeah. And so let's wrap something, not wrap it up, but just let's put something in a category. So these character classes that you just said, right? We got the Chosen, the Wayfarers, those people, those 6 classes, right? All of those exist across the entire factions, right? Each faction, it's not like Kari only have Chosen, and it's not like Tutti only have soldiers. Though each faction does have like a more powerful type of class, right? So you can assume that Tutio is going to have the best soldiers, right? So when you're playing the card game, this is how we influence, or how the game influences what you choose as your faction, is going to be how you have to play them. If you try to play a magic attack forward Tutio campaign against somebody else, you're going to struggle. Not because they don't have magic wielders, right? It's not like they don't have any savants or any wayfarers or any chosen, but it's just not going to be at the same level as, say, a Gemin magic attack, right? Just because of the faction traits. And all these, the warriors and all like the chosen and all these those character classes are all called adventurers in the card game.
Yes.
So they're called adventurers, and right now there are there only 2? There are 2 types. There are 2 types of cards. Yeah, there are only 2 types of cards.
There are 3 types of cards.
3 types of cards. It's been a while.
So there's it's okay. There's the adventurers,
Right.
Treasure cards, and
Right.
then the emblems.
Oh, right.
There
The
are,
emblems. I forgot about the emblems.
as we haven't
So
talked.
no, we haven't
So
talked about the emblems. They're very important.
yes,
So we've talked about the adventurers card. We're kind of getting into the actual card game itself. So the adventurers are the ones that are doing the fighting, right? Like those are the guys that you're putting into attack positions and defensive positions, or in
non-active.
non leading adventurer. Gosh, what was the
There's the active position and then the passive position.
correct? There you go. Right. So in active positions, in passive positions, and then the treasure cards, the emblems are attached to those cards.
Correct.
So go ahead and explain what the emblems are.
Yeah, so I mean I grew up playing card games. I played Yu-Gi-Oh so much as a kid. And when I was old enough to have my own money, I learned how to play Pokemon and Magic the Gathering. Those are the big three in card games. And I love card games. I love like turn-based strategy. But I noticed there's like this thing called power creep that is present in card games, and I was trying to figure out how would I solve power creep. And I think that's kind of just where I started with this card game.
Well, what
Uh,
is power creep for those of us that
so
don't know?
so if you think about uh, a Pokemon card in 1997,
Mm-hmm.
um, Charizard had 120 HP, right?
Right.
Everybody knows that famous card that's worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars right now. Um,
That we all
it
got
has
rid of at one
120
point.
HP. Well, as new sets come out, um, that you want the new cards to be worth something. You want the new cards to be able to be used. And so what tends to happen is you add more strength, more HP, more attack power. And so now Charizard has like 900 HP, and it's like now the old cards aren't usable anymore because
Right.
they're weak compared to the new cards. And this is a thing called power creep. It happens in almost every card game ever. With new sets, you want them to be stronger,
Right.
so that they're usable. Um, and so my idea for how to combat that, along with the idea that I wanted it to be interactive, is that to tell a story behind it. These adventurers are here; they're fighting, um, and so the goal is when we host a tournament, the whoever makes it into the finals will take those two factions, right? The cards that they chose to use. Let's say it's Elika and Gemin. Um, the finals match, whatever happens in that match determines what cards stay and what cards go for next year.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we're going to take that as this is this one particular battle in history, and if during the course of that match certain characters die, like Garrett from Elika, if Garrett is slain,
Mm-hmm.
um, his character's gone. He's dead, and so in the next set he's not going to be available anymore
Right.
because we're now setting points in history at this point.
Right.
So obviously that means that the more powerful cards are usually going to make it to the finals, and that way the powerful cards can get banned over the story, and then new sets will kind of come in and replace those.
Right.
A
Right.
new
Right.
set is probably going to have this, more of the same factions that had cards banned from them.
Right.
And it's kind of a way to keep the old cards usable,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and to allow the
Right.
players to interact with the story
Well,
and kind of
and to
help create it.
right, and to still allow new characters to come in without
Mhm.
having them need to be like, well, why would I use this card over Garrett? I like Garrett. Oh, well, Garrett's dead, so here's like, Garrett's brother thirsty for revenge,
Yep.
you know,
Exactly.
and coming in and and replacing it. And
So
yeah,
I mean, so I'm interested in this aspect of the everybody kind of the tournament and like so now how and how like if people die, it's actually and the outcome of this battle of the card game is actually going to influence history, and then you could retroactively tell exactly how that battle happened via any type of story you want,
right.
Right.
which I find really interesting. But now I'm trying to figure out how are we going to not how are we, but how are you going to design these tournaments? Is it going to be like, okay, and now this year,
Wait, I have an idea on this.
this year in Mydista we have these 8 different battles, and all these 3 people are attacking each other, and there's going to be like a little contest to see who actually gets to the end battle, who will decide who wins. Or are we going to have it so like it's only 2 factions are always going to be versing? So like how much of the setup is going to happen so that maybe you can kind of get you don't have to get the exact ending you want, but you can also ultimately boil it down to like, oh, this is what happened in this region at this time in this battle with these two people were the ones that actually met in this valley of the gorge, or whatever the hell you want to call it. These are the 2 factions that met, and that's because of the way these people were going throughout the tournament. This is just where these two entities met. And how many, like, because you have 6, I'm imagining that you can only verse 1v1 at this point, unless there's some kind of battle royal thing that's going to happen. And then there's like an alliance that happens against these 2, and now it's 2 against 1. But like, so how are you planning on having each tournament actually have a story within itself so that you can then,
I also want to put into here just really quick before we jump in here that we were talking about the emblems, and we've gotten on to tournaments. We took a right turn.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
maybe just a little basis of what the tournaments are, right? So let's just take a step back, right? We'll talk about all the stories and everything too. But these tournaments are supposed to be like Max was saying, like points in history in which the card players themselves, the ranked card players, which I think that we honestly should have chess ranking kind of things, right? Like who gets to play in these tournaments that decide history? They better be the best players for those teams,
Yeah.
right? How do you scale that? How do you do that? So these large tournaments that eventually, right, when the 2 best players, say we go with Elika and Gemmon again, that these are the 2 best players for these factions, and this is a real battle. People can die. The stakes are real, right? So what are like the tournaments themselves, right, are, ongoing. Some of them are going to be significant, right? Some of them are going to be significant for the history of Mydista. And that allows the players themselves, the audience themselves, to influence the history, decide what happens in this battle. We don't know. Max doesn't know.
right.
We don't know. Who wins this battle at the end? Nobody knows. It is not written. It will be written by the audience.
Right. And so I like that you brought that up, because the goal there is obviously we're setting it up where if we do, like you said, do local tournaments where if you win a local tournament, then you're able to enter the big tournament, right?
Right.
And so it's a limited number of entries.
Right.
But the idea behind it is we will have crafted a story to start the tournament to say, hey, this is what everybody's after at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if whoever claims this fort has a huge swing in the battle. It's like it's like playing Risk. Whoever gets all of Australia is got a good advantage, right? Yeah. So tournament 1, the story is somebody's trying to claim this particular location, and they will have a huge advantage in the upcoming battles in the future, right? And then we will write multiple different stories depending on who ends up in the finals and who ends up winning.
Right.
So we will be able to read, okay, so we just found out that Elika and Gemin are here. We're gonna read the one that the pre-written story for that particular matchup. And like, all right, officially this is canon. This is what is happening. Match, right? And then the match happens, and then we will also have a pre-written for whoever's victorious, right? Of this is what happens, this is how it goes, and in the future, this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I plan on doing is obviously this finals match is pretty big. For the story, we will then write out and create like a short film or whatever depicting that battle as it is played out in the finals tournament.
Right.
And so to compete, I was trying to think of it when working on a franchise, think of it from the perspective of the player. To compete is to win a locals tournament, take your favorite faction up to the finals, decide the fate of your deck and everybody else who plays your deck, the future of them for the next year,
right.
And potentially be half of the creative part of how that point in history plays out in a short film.
Right.
So like, I take the test and I get Gemin, right?
Yeah.
And I really like this character, Celine. She's awesome. And I read her short story. It's my favorite short story I've ever read.
Yep.
I want to play my deck with Celine as my lead, and I want to take her to the finals, and I want to win, and I want to see that victory depicted on screen. And that's I, as a fan, as a participant, as a consumer, have participated in the creation of this story.
Right.
You know? And that's that I'm chasing that feeling, that feeling. This is something that we did together.
Yeah.
Well,
and then how terrible you'd feel if Celine died.
Yeah.
And you were responsible for it,
but
too.
At least then you would be able to see it. But what I was trying to say is, like, I think that these tournaments can be a very interesting storytelling device. Like, you could say the goal of this tournament, it's called the Battle of
Bull Run.
Yeah, the Battle of Bull Castle, whatever, whatever it is, Battle of Bull Castle. But like, we also have the idea of like, that's the finals, but who's going to make it to the finals? You can have, it's like with anything. It's like there's a major battle, there's little battles that happen that kind of get you up there. Skirmishes that'll happen each time. And so it's like, kind of like, as far as the storytelling, you set up the scene of how this is happening, where all these factions start off. And you can go as a player into these things and be like, I might not make it into the final. And how many players does each team get is another question that I'm having. Like, because maybe there are alternate, like maybe if you win your battle against the one thing and they retreat, but you have some wounded people and before the final happens, you can then give those to the people that make it to the final, or maybe there could be multiple players that get into the final, and then there's another big strategy thing. Well, I'm just thinking.
I know. But in terms
of the war aspect of it, it would be not better, but it would be interesting if it's like, if there's 3 people on my team and they all have different adventurers that they are using, and we split that deck, or however it works. And if I win this, I can secure this side of the battle, which then will help me funnel more troops into the. I mean, it's
it could be very much just that fun way. Like you could have it with like all these battles, then kind of like maneuvers on a battlefield, right. Of course. Well, but I think that the important aspect to see like how it actually is going to work, right, is questions that are going to come up and stuff. I think like the first one might literally be like, this is just a battle that's happening, right? Because I know this for a fact that the idea of next generation of cards, right? The next deck is that there are going to be things introduced to that next deck that isn't in the first one, right? So siege equipment and steeds and stuff like that could dramatically change how those tournaments are played.
Right. I'm just saying that I think it this is obviously on a larger scale when, you know, maybe there can even be like, you know, a mountain that you're climbing as in each battle happens on a different part of this like map that is already on the floor. You know,
I see what you're saying. So like if we look at like a tournament bracket, each part of the bracket is a different location.
Right. Yes.
It's I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
I really like that idea. Actually, that's really, really cool, really interesting.
So that, you know,
well, that way, that would be a way to get like two players playing the same faction on, like, if it was like, if you want to do 5 versus 5, which might be a great way of doing it, right? And those are like individual battles, and because of how like Kari wins here, and then that means it's kind of outflanking Elika on this side, and that's important because maybe buffs or whatever.
And right, and if how the people win could also be like, so like let's say every battle happens, and if you win the battle, you get to go one way, but if whoever wins the battle by the biggest margin gets the choice, it's like, oh, I'm this people, I match up better against this than I do the other team that won. So I can choose to go this way while that team has to choose a different way.
Yeah.
And you kind of can, you know, there's a lot of extra layers of strategy that go into that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of war, you know?
No, right. Yeah.
So it's like, it's very interesting. And then just the storytelling that then can happen even in the tournaments. You might actually get people to show up to the tournaments just to watch the, like, more than enough. Like, people could be cheering in their elevator.
Well, that's what you would hope. That's what you would hope.
But I'm just like, if it's just like, you know, 3 people at a folding table. Like,
no, well, I mean, it'll definitely start. It's no,
I'm just saying. I'm saying, I'm like, it could be very much like 16 people in a row, and you can have everybody like.
I mean, they're
going to be time, you know, like at a
at chess. But there's obviously going to be like commentation and stuff and concessions. We're renting out the entire McCormick place for this, and the McCormick place is huge. It had more than enough space to hold the entire Chicago Comic-Con. I don't even know what it was called. It wasn't called Comic-Con, but they had that, and then there was still plenty of space. Was it called Comic-Con?
I think it was.
Anyways, we went there. It had already ended. And we just walked through. We didn't even pay. And everybody's like, how did you get here? Because we didn't have badges. And we're like, we just kept walking and nobody stopped us. Okay, so the tournament idea, it's such a great one because it brings the audience right into what it makes them decision makers in a which way, right? How they played, who's in the next deck. And then also back to the character stories, Garrett of Elika dies, right? And then was like, who's this new character or new characters that come out that may not have been in the conflict, but now because this character, right? We joked that his brother would come in and like,
yeah, well, right? And that his brother could be is probably going to be in the short story, you know,
right?
It's his world, it's his companions, it's his like life that we see in the short story, and so they're like, well, I remember in the short story he was going after this. Did he ever reach that goal? No.
Right.
And now he's out of the tournament forever. He's out of canon. He's officially died. How is that goal going to be met? And now it's somebody else taking up the mantle of being like, you know what? He wanted this and he never got to see it through. I'm going to see it through for him. Right. You know? And these characters that are present as, you know, side characters in a short story interacted with in the short story can eventually be made into cards and stuff like that, you know.
Correct. They uphold the call of war. They like, oh, my friend died. I guess I have to volunteer for this. This conflict's getting very real to me, you know.
Right. It's getting closer to home.
Right. You know, and then, you know, you have like a lot of different ways to tell these stories too, which is cool. I was just thinking about, you know, now we have, since we're going to be spanning, I don't know how many years this conflict in Mydista happens, but you could be, you know, it could be a generation, and then you have these family lineages that are happening. And it's like, oh,
family trees, yeah.
Hey, he died here, and then that's what made him there. Then he ended up doing something else. I mean, I don't know how in depth you want to get to like their family life and how many children they have, and is it even possible after the brother dies that his son comes up and avenges him as like a 10-year-old? You know, you don't want that guy to go to war.
Right.
You know, so it's very. There's a lot of deep storytelling that you
Deep
could get
tunneling that you can do, yeah.
that you could get there, but I think the really
And on
unique
a lot
part
of different mediums too. Medias, wow.
right. I think, but the unique part about it is that these card games are actually going to be influential in what happens next and where this is going. It almost gives it there's the only reason why Madden keeps getting another game every year is because the Super Bowl happens every year,
and the rosters
change every year,
right.
And it doesn't matter how crappy the game is, people buy it because
they want to play as their team.
I want to play as the team that I think should have won the Super Bowl, last year.
Right.
And this is kind of like you are now giving it into the people that are trying to tell the stories. I mean, I'm sure that eventually you want to hire a bunch of actors to kill themselves in these super battles, like actually make it work. Actually,
hire a bunch of actors to kill themselves.
Full snuff films, where it's like, yep, he died. I'm sorry, no one was able to save him. Where's the mage? Oh, the mage is another actor that can't actually do anything. Oh no.
And I think what's interesting too is you could call it a little bit of a media mix with how battle happens, and then you could show the battle in a different medium. But I think that it's so much more expansive to be able to see how these fights actually happened. You could know the end result, but it would be so much fun to see an illustration, a cartoon, animation, or live action or something to see how these battles happen. Because really, the guy who's playing the cards isn't going to be like, Garrett goes like, I wish I could have seen my brother one last, that kind of stuff. Like you lose that.
Right, you're adding a lot of story and dramaticism.
Right.
Within those live action versions, and then also what we were talking about is that after the character's killed, then all of a sudden you could have this widescaping, series about this character, the decisions that made him go left versus right, that all kind of were chosen by the people that were playing the game, but now there's an actual reason behind
a conscience behind it.
Well, no, we salt and peppered it and made it.
Well, I imagine too, like you play as your Tutio deck in the tournament, and you make it through the first couple rounds, but you lose and you're out of the brackets. But then you see somebody playing that same deck continuing on and going to the finals, and you're watching those characters that you've played this battle for, that you have this kind of connection to, continuing on into the finals and either winning or losing. The drama is there.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. It's heartbreaking to be like, I didn't make it. If I had made it, I would have won that match. Right. Whatever.
I got screwed.
Yeah, exactly. or hell yes, the character that I played won. It was great.
Right. Or one day I hope to be as.
And I was running my Splint, the Barbarian tactic,
right.
And that guy used the same tactic, and that's what won the day.
Not to go back into football, but could be kind of cool, like when you're going through the bracket. Let's say one of your characters dies in the bracket, but he's not in the final, so he wasn't slain.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But because those are all things that we're trying to make into the story, maybe if he dies in one of the lower brackets, he's injured, or maybe he a third of his hit points are gone. So now you're like, oh, I want to keep this guy alive when I'm going into the final, so I don't want to play him the way I would normally play him, which could lead to a lot of interesting storytelling where it's like, oh yeah, he got injured in this battle. We don't know exactly how he got injured, but in the movie of this battle, now we have, he had this arrow in his thigh, and he wasn't able to charge the front lines in the main battle like he wanted to. He survived, but only because he got injured in one of those other battles.
Yeah.
I like that idea. I think that it would have to be in a digital tournament format so that could be tracked a lot easier.
Yeah, right.
Because I was just thinking about it card wise, how to track all of those numbers would be crazy. Because I mean, you're gonna lose party members,
of course,
left and right as the tournament goes on. It has to be a really small tournament, or
Right. Yeah,
You
because
know,
there's only 75 characters or something around that.
yeah.
There's not a
So
ton of
72 adventures, yeah.
72 adventurers, so there's not a ton of adventurers to do that just yet. Where like each one would be like the lower brackets would be so important. Um,
Yeah.
I remember you telling me that like we were having conversations like in a future deck you would have the injured version of like for card like injured Glorian, right? Which
Yeah.
is kind of interesting because you would use that card like has no hit points, but the passive ability of that card might still be worth, you know, taking
Yeah.
it so that oh maybe I take an arrow in the passive position and die, but it was worth getting the passive ability.
Right.
So there's a lot of expansion and stuff that can happen within this game. You know, we didn't get a chance really to talk about the treasure cards, but they work just like swords and spells that buff your character stats when you're attacking another character. And then the emblems themselves, which essentially turn them into, or not turn them into, but become harness the power guardian that their faction is connected to, right? And that gives them buffs of 10 HP and 10 attack and stuff like that, which is really cool, almost like a Power Ranger going into Morphin time, and they get into this, and then they can use that buff for 3 in-game turns before it leaves, and it has to be put away, which is it's a cool aspect to it as well. And the emblems are going to be extremely rare, so it's not going to be emblem versus emblem versus emblem. Like you're not going to have all those in the deck. There'll be limits and such. We've touched on it a couple times. I want to make sure we get it in here. The website, which is going to be a whole onslaught of where the short stories are. I sent Max sent something to you the other day. Conan the Barbarian. I don't know how this popped up on my LinkedIn, but they had an interactive map, and by interactive, it was just a map that had little points that you could click on, and then it would pop up, which I think would be a really good idea for the Knights of Mydista website.
Absolutely.
So that you could see where these factions are situated in different areas. There's a lot of backstory that we couldn't really get into. And then, so we have the website that's going to have a lot of fun stories coming up periodically that you can go and check out. The link will be in the description. And then also, we've talked about the quiz to find out what faction you're in based on questions that Max has developed. How many questions were in that quiz?
I think it's 10 questions.
10 questions. It's still in development. Previously in the podcast, Jack mentioned that, you maybe the passion and friendship faction, which is Kari, don't always get along with the intellectual and philosophical side, which is Satyr, which they don't always get along. And ironically, those are the two factions that Jack and I got. So just like those are the ones that we got. I had Kari, and then Jack was Satyr. And Gavin was.
I was
Max.
only 1 point away from a different one, wasn't I?
Right. Yeah, we were all.
We were all basically tied.
Right. So. So there's some bugs that still need to be worked on. I'm really excited about the quiz, though. Personality quiz. It's so much more in depth than what Hogwarts Legacy did, or the Wizarding World with what house you're in, where it was very clear.
Thing too, essentially, like I said, I wanted to fix power creep. I wanted to fix that terrible Pottermore quiz. It's like, it's like this whole franchise is built on fixing the bullshit of other franchises,
right? And then of course. Unknowingly making other bullshit that somebody else is going to come and fix, right? Like that's the way that the world works. So, the questions were really, really fun. There were a couple of them that we had to sit there and really think about which way you would go. And each answer gives you certain points into each faction, and then at the end you tally up how much you get, and then you would get your faction. You don't have to choose that faction, just like in Hogwarts Legacy, everybody was picking Slytherin anyways, even though they were getting Hufflepuff. But it gives you a basis and an initial loyalty, which I think is really fun for a fan base to immediately go like, you know what? I am Satyr. That's right. And then those guys are your guys, ride or die. I mean, everybody who listens to this podcast knows we're Bears fans. And that's a ride or die till you die kind of thing. And it sucks, but that's what you are, right? And so even if your faction's not winning, you hope to God that somebody comes along and becomes the best player and is able to change your fates and your fortunes. So that's a lot of fun. Those are going to come out. And then as If you don't already follow Story World Explorers on Instagram and on LinkedIn, definitely do so, because as updates come up with all of the story worlds that we've had on the podcast, we share those. So if when this comes out, the podcast isn't, or the quiz isn't done yet, you will know about the quiz. Yeah. So any final thoughts, Max, on Knights of Mydista?
I'm just excited to be working on it. I think we've had a lot of fun. I want to thank you both, because just talking about it over the years has been really informative and really helpful. Because I'm a scatterbrain, and so, like I said, all of these things are coming from different places.
Right.
And I think it's coming together really well, and that is in no small part to our conversations. So
yeah.
I want to thank you guys for being a part of this.
Of course. And as we say at the end of every podcast, anything that you need from us, all you have to do is ask, and if we can do it, we will help. Yeah, thanks for being on.
Of course. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for adventuring with us, intrepid explorers. If you want to explore more story worlds, don't hesitate to watch anything from our catalog.
That's right. I would highly recommend Christian Nome, just because of the tabletop RPG, right. Which actually, thankfully, he was the one that introduced us to that whole concept. But a lot of great stuff. If you want more story worlds that you're looking to explore, we have those options. And then educational stuff as well, if you want to learn more about transmedia and how to create your own story world. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching.